Too bright. There you go. Gotta turn on the dark. Put like something darker in the back there. Move that up a little bit. So you won't get to see my models if I put the camera too high. I guess I gotta lean back a little bit and slouch a little bit. Then you can see me better as well. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Reads. My fat fingers in the way. The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And today we're going to read... Today's going to be a shorter stream. We're just going to read two of the shorter tales because I was thinking about like maybe if there's two really short tales I could fit a third one, but then like the one after... I think it's the Sergeant. So the ones we're going to read today are the Reeve's Tale and the Cook's Tale. And they're both really short. The Cook's Tale is like 2 pages. It's really short. But the problem is the Sergeant's Tale, which is after the Cook's Tale. So we're going to read the Reeve, then the Cook. And after the Cook would be the Sergeant. But the Sergeant's Tale is really long. His is like the Knight's Tale, basically. Because it's always like the military guys that have like these long-ass stories, I guess. I mean, there's a good reason for that. Because, of course... guys who've been in the military, they've seen some shit, and so they're the ones who come up with like the wildest stories of, you know, the crazy, you know, you think of like military people today and they tell you like stories of some of the crazy shit they've seen, and they'll tell you like a long-winded tale about it. So it makes sense that like the Knight and the Sergeant would have longer stories, but because of that we're just gonna have a short stream today because the Reeve and the Miller have pretty short stories. So that's the plan for today. We'll probably only stream for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Of course, you know, you can always pester me with questions and we can take more detours today because I'm not like in a rush to finish a longer story. We're just going to casually just go through these two shorter stories. So with that said, let's dive into it. And now we are going to read the Reeve's Tale. But before that... when the people had stopped laughing at this absurd affair of Absalom and Fly Nicholas, they made various comments, but chuckled with amusement for the most part. So far as I could see, nobody took offense at the story except for Oswald, the Reeve. So the context is, if you guys missed 2 weeks ago, we had just finished the Miller story, and the Miller was just like a stupid, dirty joke, was basically his story. And so I'm reading the aftermath of that. And the Reeve, his name is Oswald. He's the one who's kind of pissed off about the inappropriate story, I guess you could say, told by the Miller. It left a spark of resentment in his heart, for he was a carpenter by trade. He began to carp at it a bit, grumbling, "Happen I could pay you back properly with a tale of a swaggering miller who got his eye wiped, if I wanted to talk smut. But I'm old, too old for that. Grass time's over. It's winter fodder for me now. This white poll writes me down an old man, and my heart's just middle-due as my hair. I might as well be a split arse or medlar, and that's a fruit that gets moldier and moldier till it's rotten and laid up in muck or straw. Us old men are like that. More's the pity. Never ripe till rotten. So long as the world pipes, we'll keep on dancing, for there's always this snag. We'd like a white head and a green tail like a leek. Even though our strength be gone, we love folly just the same. And when we can't do it, we'll talk about it. There's a spark yet in our raked up ashes. I'll show you 4 live coals, greed, lying, anger, and boasting. 4 embers that belong to old age. Though we can scarcely move our limbs, desire never fails. And add the truth of it, as for me, there's life in the old dog yet, though it's many a year since my tap of life began to run. For surely I was born, death turned on the tap of life and let it flow, and it's run ever since, till the cask almost empty. Now my life streams no more than a few drops on the barrel's edge. My poor old tongue may well ring and chime of the follies of long ago. There's nothing left but the dotage for the old. Having listened to this homily, our host exclaimed magisterially, "What's the good of all this wisdom? Must we spend all day Bible thumping? The devil made a preacher out of a Reeve, and the devil made a sailor or a sawbones out of a cobbler. Now tell your tale, and don't waste time. See, there's Deptford, and it's 7:30 already, and Greenwich, full of blackguards over there. It's high time you began your tale." "Well, gentlemen," said Oswald the Reeve, I hope you'll none of your take offence if I answer by pulling his leg a bit. Tit for tats only. This drunken miller has just told us how a carpenter was made a fool of, perhaps to make fun of me, because I am one myself, and if you don't mind, I mean to pay him out. I'll talk in his own bumpkin language, and I wish to God he'd break his neck. He can set a mote in my eye and not a beam in his own. Now we begin the Reeve's tale. At Trumpington, not far from Cambridge, runs a stream, with a bridge over it, and on this stream there stands a mill. And it's the truth I'm telling you. A miller dwelt many a year. He was proud and gay as any peacock. He could play the bagpipes, fish, mend nets, turn wood cups into a lathe, wrestle and shoot. A long cutlass and a keen-bladed sword always hung around his belt, while in his pouch he carried a natty little dirk. A dirk is a knife. It was as much as a man's life was worth to go near him. And he kept a Sheffield knife in his stocking, bald as a monkey, with a round pug-nosed face. He was a thorough-going market bully, and nobody dare lay a finger on him. He swore he'd make them pay for it pretty soon if they did. In fact, he was a crook, and a sly one at that. A habitual pilferer of corn and meal. His nickname was Swagger Simpkin. Now he had a wife who come from a noble family. Her father was the town priest. So basically, that meant that the girl was a bastard kid because priests were not supposed to marry. He had to give a large dowry of brass were along with her to get Simpkin to make the alliance. She had been brought up in a nunnery for Simpkin to keep up his yeoman status, and said he wouldn't take a wife if she wasn't well brought up and a virgin. And she was proud and pert as magpie. And the two of them were something to see on Sundays when he strutted in front of her with his hood wrapped about his head. And she followed in a red get-up matching the Simpkins' stockings. No one dared call her anything but madam, or had the nerve to make a pass at her in the street unless she wanted Simpkin to slaughter him with cutlass, knife, or dagger. Jealous people are always dangerous customers, or at any rate that's what they want their wives to think. As her reputation was a bit smirched, and she kept people at a distance, Ditchwater does as much. With her how the hell do you say this? Supercilious disdain. She felt there was consideration owed her on account of her family, and because of her good upbringing at the nunnery. Now between them, they produced a daughter 20 years old, but no others, except a 6-month-old child, a bouncing boy, still in the cradle. The girl was well grown and plump, with a snub nose, grey eyes, broad buttocks, high round breasts, and I must admit, really pretty hair. And because she was pretty, the town priest intended to make her the heiress of his house and land, and was being difficult about her marrying because he wanted her to marry well into some worthy family of ancient lineage. The goods of Holy Church ought to be spent on blood descended from the Holy Church, and so he was going to honor his holy blood, even if he had to devour Holy Church in the process. Now be sure this miller levied a huge toll on the wheat and malt of the country round, and in particular there was a great college at Cambridge called Solar Hall, whose wheat and malt was ground by him. Now one day it happened that its manciple fell ill with some malady, and it was thought he was sure to die. As a consequence, the miller began to steal 100 times more meal and corn than before, up until he had been content with a polite pilfering. But now he was a barefaced robber. The warden was annoyed about it, and made a great to-do. But the miller didn't give a straw. He blustered and denied it point blank. It's actually getting kind of uncomfortable slouching like that. I'll just sit back a little bit and move the microphone, and hopefully I can still be in frame. Now at the college I speak of there were 2 young students, headstrong, fellow games for anything, just for the fun of it. And they pestered the warden to give them a short leave to go to the mill and see the corn ground. They were ready to wager their necks, and the miller wouldn't be able to rob them, by force or fraud, of so much as a hill peck of corn. And in the end, the warden gave them leave. One was called John, and the other was Alan. Both were born in the same town, a place called Strother, somewhere in the far north. Alan collected all his gear, and slung a sack of corn over the horse. Then Alan and John set out, each with a good sword and buckler at his side. They didn't need a guide, for John knew the way, and when they reached the mill, he threw down the sack. Alan spoke first. "How do? Well, Simon, how's thee wife and lass?" "Welcome, Alan," said Simpkin, "and on my life, here's John as well. And how are things? What brings you here?" "Christ Almighty, Simon, need knows no law," said John. "It behooves him that has no help to help his'n. Or you're daft, as the learned say. Our manciple's near dying with toothache in his head. And so I've come with Alan to grind our corn and bring it home. You'll hurry it up for us, I hope." "I'll do that, trust me," said Simpkin. "But what will you do while I've the job at hand?" "I shall stand right next to the hopper, by God," said Alan, "and see how the corn goes in. I've never seen yon hopper swinger a bat in my born days." "Do that, John," answered Alan. "Then you can bet I'll be underneath to watch how the meal falls down into your trough. I shall play the game all right. For sure, me and ye're the same sort, John. I'm as bad a miller as you." The miller grinned at their fatuity, and thought, "This is all just a ruse. They think nobody can diddle them, but as I am a miller, I'm hoodwink them yet, and all their clever philosophy. The more smart tricks they try, the more I'll steal in the end. I'll give them bran for flour still, As the mayor said up to the wolf one day, the most learned aren't always the wisest. I don't give 'em a bean for all their book learning. So I'm just going to take a quick drink, but to kind of get you up to speed. So basically, these two young smart guys, they show up at the miller's farm and they're like, they want to buy some corn. And the miller, being the miller and the kind of scumbaggy that he is, not the narrative, not the one traveling with the group, but the miller in the story, easy misconception. The miller is thinking of conning them because he's a thief. And so his plot is to somehow find a way to con these guys and get more money and cheat them of like a good amount of flour and corn or something like that. Alright, back to it. When he saw his chance, he stole quietly out of the door and looked around until he found the student's horse standing tethered under an arbor behind the mill. He went boldly up to the horse and stripped it of its bridle on the spot. Once loosed, the horse turned toward the fen where the wild mares were running free. With a whinny, it raced off through thick and through. The miller returned and said not a word, but went on with his job and joked with the two students until their corn was well and truly ground. But when the meal was sacked, and Tied John went out and found his horse missing. "Help! Help!" he cried. "Our horse is lost." "God's bones, Allen! Stare thy stumps! Come out, man, at once! We've lost Warden's palfrey." Allen forgot meal and corn and all, and the need for keeping an eye on things went clean out of his mind. "What? Where'd he ban?" he cried. The miller's wife came running in. "Alas, your horse is off to the wild mares in the fen as fast as he can gallop. No thanks to the hand that tied him up. You ought to have knotted the rein better." "Alas!" cried John. "Allen, for Christ's sake, take this sword off. I'll do the same. God knows I'm wick as a roe. Christ almighty, he'll not escape the both of us. Why didn't you put the nag in your barn? Devil take it, you're daft, Allen, by God." And those two silly students ran off as hard as they could, towards the fen. When the miller saw they'd gone, he took half a bushel of their flour and told his wife to knead it into a cake. "I bet those students have had a fright," said he. "Still, a miller can singe a scholar's beard, and for all his book learning, let them run along. Just watch 'em go. Well, let the children play. They aren't going to catch him that easily, or I'll eat my hat." The poor students ran up and down, crying, "Watch out! Whoa, whoa! Hey, up there! Watch out behind! You go! Whistle! I'll head 'em off!" In short, no matter how hard they tried, the horse ran so fast they failed to catch it until nightfall. But they finally cornered it in a ditch. Poor John and Allen came back wet and weary as cattle in the rain. Said John, "Ugh, I wish I'd never been born. We've been fooled, made a laughing stock, our corn stolen, and they'll call us fools. The warden and our mates and the miller, worst of all." Thus grumbled John as he made his way to the mill, leading his bayyard by the rein. He found the miller sitting by a fire, for it was night, and they could go no further. So they begged him, for God's sake, to give them lodging and shelter for their money. Said the miller, If there is any of you shall have your share of it, such as it is, my house is pretty cramped. But you've been educated, you'll know how to argy-bargy and make out that a 20-foot space is a mile across. Now let's see if this place will do. You can always make it bigger by talking, as is the way of you learned folk. "Come now, Simon," said John. "There you have us. You'll have your joke. By St. Cuthbert. But as the saying is, a man shall take an of twa things, sick as he finds, as sick as he brings. Good host, let me beg you to get us some food and drink, and make us welcome. We'll pay you on the nail. You can't catch a hawk with an empty hand. Now look, here's our brass ready to spend." The miller roasted them a goose, and sent his daughter to town for bread and ale. He tethered their horse so that it wouldn't run loose again, and made up a fine bed spread with sheets and blankets for them in his room, not a dozen feet from his own bed. Nearby, in the very same room, his daughter had a bed all to herself. This was the best they could do, for the simple reason that there was nowhere else in the place to sleep. They supped, talked, and made merry, and drank any moment of strong ale. Then at about midnight went to bed. You gotta see where this is going, though. Everybody has a bed in the same room. Kind of like how, if you can remember this far back, when I was playing Octopath Traveler 2, and you go to like Agnia's house, you see that like all the beds are in one room. Because remember, houses back then in that kind of world, houses aren't like super big, so like people don't have their own bedrooms. Like you think about like, in our modern day and age, having your own bedroom, it's like having a friggin' palace. So it's not weird that like everyone would just have like all the beds were in the same room. But at the same time, you gotta know where this is going. The miller got himself properly plastered. He wasn't flushed, but quite pallid with drink. He hiccuped and talked through his nose as if he had asthma or a cold in his head. Now off to bed he went, his wife with him, and she was as merry as a grig, for she never wet her whistle well and truly. The cradle was set at the foot of the bed, that she might rock it or give the child suck. And when they drained the jug, the daughter went straight to bed, followed by Alan and John. There wasn't a drop left, and they'd no need for a sleeping draught. The miller had certainly had a skinful, for he snorted like a horse in his sleep, honking at both ends. Basically, he's so drunk, he's like burping and farting at the same time. That's what that means. And his wife joined in the chorus with a will. People could hear them wheezing away a quarter of a mile off, and the girl snored with them for company's sake. Now after listening to this melody, Alan poked John and said, "Yeah, you asleep? Did you ever hear such a warbling before? Talk about evening prayers. The itch fall on them. It's the weirdest thing you ever heard. They're going to come to the worst of bad ends. There'll be no rest for me as long as this long neat. But never mind, it'll all be for the best. For John," said he, "you can take it from me, I shall sink into yon girl if I can. The law allows us some compensation, John. There's a law says if a man's harmed in one way, he's to be relieved in another. There's no denying our corn was stolen, and we've had bad luck all day. And since I'll get no amends against my loss, I shall take compensation. Christ Almighty, that's how it shall be." Hello, Gauntlets. Welcome to the stream. And how's it going? It's going alright. Just reading through the Canterbury Tales. "Now watch your step, Alan," answered John. "Yon miller's a dangerous customer, and if he wakes up suddenly, he might do us both a good mischief." "I count him less than a fly," answered Alan, and got up and crept over to the girl. She was fast asleep on her back, and by the time she saw him, he was so close it was too late to cry out. In short, they were soon at one. Now I'll leave Alan to his fun, and speak of John. John lay quietly where he was for a few minutes, then began lamenting to himself. This isn't much of a joke, said he. I can only say I've been made a monkey of, while my mate's had something in his pains. He's got the miller's daughter in his arms. He took a chance and got his oats, while I'm lying in bed like a sack of rubbish, and when this jabe is told one day, I'll look a clathead, daft as a brush. I'll get up and chance it. It's muck or nettles now, as the saying is. So, up he got and went softly over to the cradle, picked it up, and quietly carried it to the foot of his own bed. Soon afterwards, the miller's wife stopped snoring and woke up. She went out to piss, came back and missed the cradle. Here and there she groped, but couldn't find it at all. "Oh dear," she said. "I nearly went wrong and almost got into the student's bed. Oh, bless us! I have found myself in bad trouble." And she moved until she found the cradle. She kept groping further and further with her hands until she found the bed, thinking it was well because the cradle stood next to it, not knowing where she was in the dark. She fairly crawled in beside the student. She lay still and would have fallen asleep, but in a little while John came to life and threw himself upon this good woman. It was the best bout she had in years. He thrust away like a madman, hard and deep. And so the two students had time of their lives till it was nearly dawn. Now in the morning Alan began to tire after toiling all night long, and whispered, "Goodbye, sweet Molly, the day is here. I can't stay no longer, but as I live and breathe I'll always be thy own true lad wherever I am." "Then go, sweetheart, and goodbye," said she. "But I'll tell you one thing before you go. When you're on your way home, past the mill, just behind the entrance of the door, you'll find a half bustle cake, made of your own flour, which I helped my father steal. God save you and keep you, sweetheart." And saying this, she nearly began to weep. Alan got up and thought, "I'll slip in beside my friend before day breaks," and soon his hand found the cradle. "Oh, by God," thought he, "I'm up shit creek. My head's in a whirl from tonight's work. That's why I can't go right. I can tell by the cradle I'm off course. This is where the miller and his wife are kipping." And as the devil would have it, he passed on the bed where the miller lay, thinking to creep in beside his friend John. He crawled in beside the miller and threw his arm around his neck and whispered, "You, John, you pighead, wake up for Christ's sake and listen to a rare joke. For by St. James, tonight I screwed the miller's daughter 3 times upon her back, while you've been shivering, flayed to death." "Have you, you blackguard?" cried the miller. "By God, I'll kill you, you treacherous jacknape! How dare you dishonor my daughter, so nobly born and all?" And he caught Alan by his Adam's apple, who in turn seized him furiously and belted him on the nose with his fist. A stream of blood poured down his chest, and they plunged on about on the floor with bleeding mouths and noses, like two pigs in a poke. Up and down they had it, until the miller tripped himself on a stone and fell backward on his wife, who knew nothing about this silly brawl. She had just fallen asleep with John, who had kept her up all night. But the fall shocked her out of sleep. "Help, holy cross of Brothamol!" she cried. "Into thy hands, O Lord, to thee I call. Wake up, Simon! The fiend's upon me. My heart's bursting. Help, I'm dying. There's someone lying on my stomach and on my head. Help, Simpkin! These wretched boys are fighting." John leapt out of bed as fast as he could and groped along the wall to find a stick. And the miller's wife got up also, knowing the room better than John. She soon found a stick leaning against the wall, and she saw a light glimmering where the moon shone brightly in through a hole, and by this light made out the pair of them, but couldn't tell who was who, till she caught a glimpse of something white. And when she saw this white thing, she supposed that one of the students must be wearing a nightcap, so crept over with her stick, meaning to hit Allen a good thwack, and instead smote the miller on his bald pate. Down he went, yelling, "Help! I'm killed!" The students gave him a good beating and left him lying. Then they threw on their clothes, collected their horse and meal, and were off. But they stopped at the mill to pick up the cake baked from their half-bushel of flour. And so that swaggering miller took a good beating, lost his fee from grinding the corn, and paid for every penny of Allen and John's supper, who belabored him into a bargain. His wife was screwed, and so was his daughter. That's what comes of being a miller and a cheat. So it's a true proverb that says, "Do as you would be done by." Swindlers always get themselves swindled in the end. Now may God, who sits in majesty on high, save everyone in this company. And so I've paid out the miller in my tale. So, in case you got lost in the crazy ramblings of the Reeve's tale, basically it's a little bit of an exchange between, like, after the miller insulted a carpenter, the Reeve, who was himself a carpenter, decided to make fun of millers, and they basically tried to turn it into like a moral story about, like, hey, don't be a cheat, but at the same time was kind of like doing a personal jab. But it also plays into that whole idea of, like, you don't mess with the old guy, because the old guy knows how to throw, like, major shade, which is exactly what he did. Because, damn, like, you thought the miller's cuckold story was pretty bad. But the way the Reeve throws, like, so much shade at, like, this conniving miller in the story, and by extension, the miller that he's traveling with, the amount of shade that just goes out is, like, damn mad. And so the Reeve is basically just, like, massively insulting, like, you know, you can talk shit about people, but we all know you would be the one who's most screwed in life. It's the whole know you, but on a ridiculous scale. Excuse me. There's not much else to say about the Reeve's tale. After all, the Reeve's tale is really just a revenge story. But with that said, we're going to move on to the Cook's Tale. The Cook's Tale is pretty short, so we'll probably finish the stream after this, because the one after this is actually the Sergeant's Tale, and the Sergeant's Tale is actually really long. Yeah, the Sergeant's Tale is really long. So we'll save the Sergeant, and then we'll probably read the story after his, because the Sergeant's Tale will probably take us 2 hours to read. His is pretty long, so we'll just do a short stream today. But that's fine. We're just going to read this short story, and then we'll be done for today. While the Reeve was telling his story, the cook looked as pleased as if his back was being scratched. "Ha ha ha!" he laughed. "By Christ, the miller got a tart answer to his argument about lodgings. Solomon had something there when he said, 'Bring not every man into thy house. It's risky business, taking people in for the night. A man can't be too careful who he takes into his house. May God send me sorrow and grief if ever since I was called Hodge of Ware, I heard of a miller so thoroughly done. Oh, what a wicked joke! They played him in the dark? God forbid we should leave off there. And if you like to listen to a story by a poor fellow like me, I'll tell you as best I can of a little joke that happened in our city." Our host answered, "You've my consent. Tell away, Roger. And mind it's good, for many the stale pastry with no gravy in it, and twice warmed up Jack of Dover that you've sold. And many's the time pilgrims have called down Christ's damnation on you, when you were the worst of the parsley stuffing that they had ate with your stubble-fed goose. For your cookshop's full of flies. Now tell on, good Roger. Your good name's at stake. But for heaven's sake, please don't mind me pulling your leg. Many a true word spoken in jest." "Ha! My word, that's true enough," said Roger. "But as the Flemings say, a true joke's no joke. And so, Harry Bailey, swear you won't take offense if I tell a tale of an innkeeper before we've finished. Nevertheless, I shan't tell it yet, but I bet you'll be paid in full before we part." And with that he laughed and cheered up. Then he told this story as you shall hear it. Apprentice once lived in our city who worked in the... Apprentice is just a fancy word for like an office worker. A salary man, if you will. He was as merry as a goldfinch in the greenwood. A short, handsome lad, as brown as a berry, with black hair elegantly combed. And he danced so well and merrily that they called him Perkin Reveller. And any girl who met him was in luck, for he was as full of love and lechery as a hive is of honey. He danced and sang at all the weddings, and was fonder of the tavern than the shop. For wherever there was procession in Cheapside, he would shoot out of the shop to run after it, and never come back till he danced his fill, and seen all there was to see. He gathered a gang of his own sort about him, for dancing, singing, and like diversions. They rendezvoused in such a place and such a street to play dice, for there was no prentice in the town who threw dice better than Perkin, and moreover he was a free spender on the sly. This his master discovered to his cost, for many a time he found the till empty. For you may be sure that when a prentice is always living it up with dicing, gaming, and women, his master pays for it with his shop, though he gets no share of the fun. Though the prentice may play the fiddle and guitar, his fun and games are the same as theft. For as you see, honesty and high living are always at loggerheads in the case of the poor. Though scolded night and day, and sometimes hauled off with fanfares to Newgate jail, this merry prentice stayed with his master until his apprenticeship was nearly complete. But one day his master, looking around for his indentures, finally recalled the proverb that says, "Better throw the rotten apple out to let it rot the others." It's the same with the riotous servant. It's less harmful to let him go than keep him to spoil all the other servants in the place. So his master gave him his release and bade him depart with curses on his head. And so the merry prentice got his freedom. Now he could revel all night long, or else give it up. And, because there's no thief without a hanger-on to help him to loot and swindle those he robs or sponges, Perkin immediately sent his bed and gear to one of his boon, who was just as fond of dice, revelry, and dissipation, whose wife kept a shop for apprentices' sake, but screwed her for living. And that's the story. It's a short one. So the cook doesn't have much of a tale. Just tells about like. I guess the way you could say that the cook kind of just tells like. Um, it kind of how would I put it, like a something like a political commentary, I guess, would be the modern equivalent of, I guess, a disdain toward young people. So um, the Miller and the Reeve, as well, we're not totally sure about the Miller, but the Reeve being a much older guy, the Miller's probably not a young guy himself, but the the Miller and the Reeve kind of tell stories about like older people getting kind of like cucked by younger guys. And so the stories play out, and both the Miller and the Reeves tale have like these younger, educated men conning older guys essentially by screwing their wives and daughters. But the cook kind of gives like a commentary. It's like, well, I mean, you guys, it is like you guys tell this as a joke, but this is actually like how it is. Because, old guys like you keep enabling young guys to do shit like this. And that's kind of what the cook is kind of making a commentary about. Because he tells a story about basically a young guy who's a freeloader. And then all he does is freeload, and it's like, well, because you guys keep enabling these younger guys. That's why like so many young guys are so useless and such shitbags, because you keep enabling them to do that. And that's an interesting thing, that like Chaucer already kind of had this commentary within the storytelling of the Canterbury Tales. It's very ahead of its time in that sense, because I mean that's kind of something we see a lot in modern day. Is that we have a lot of, your young nihilists who just go around and they just sap away at all the fruits of society, but yet contribute nothing to it. Under the guise of being educated, but not being able to, like, not doing any actual work. But, it's one of those things that, like, how do I put this? As time has passed, it's kind of terrible that we see this happening, but at the same time, we like playing it as a big joke, but at what point does the joke stop being a joke? And that's kind of what the cook is getting at, which I think on a meta narrative level is very interesting, because it was probably obviously a problem back then, and then the old saying, as much as things change, things stay the same. Oh, obligatory water noise. But let me just pause this for a second. Okay, thanks for waiting. A little bit of fun facts, I guess. Just moving away from the Canterbury Tales for a second. But did you know that out of all your household appliances, most of the time, your toilet is actually the household appliance that you have that uses the most water per use, if that makes sense. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't know this, and they would actually ask that as a question. We were like doing like your elementary school and you're doing like a science um, assignment, if you will, science assignment, and it was about like water usage, and one of the questions on it was about what is the household appliance in your house that uses the most water, and in a multiple choice it was like the laundry was one of the options. I thought it was a laundry back when I was a kid. Toilet was another answer on the multiple choice, which was the correct answer. I can't remember what the other two were. One was like I think it was like the garden hose, when people use it to garden or wash their cars or whatever. And I can't remember what the fourth option was, but it doesn't really matter because the correct answer was the toilet. And what I didn't know at the time is that every time, and it's one of those things that like we kind of lose perspective on, because after you go to the bathroom and you just hit the flush thing, or you live in some advanced city like Tokyo and your toilets are automatic, something that like it just takes it takes a second for it to happen for you. You just hit the flushing device, the flushing lever, and then it's kind of done. And then you think like, okay, yeah, water goes, the toilet just resets the water. But if you actually know how the toilet actually works, the toilet uses a lot of water per use. That's why every time, like, okay, so why I'm talking about toilet and water usage is that's the reason why you hear the running water is because you flush the toilet once. And there's those, like we sit there for like a whole 90 ass seconds, and I usually just mute the mic most of the time, so you don't have to hear the whole water rushing process for 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That's how long it takes for all that water to reset. The water reset. The first water goes through the pipe, and then there's other water going through another pipe to go back to the toilet. So that's 2 pipes. And then the water, okay, so water goes out, and then once that happens, it's actually 1 pipe, but there's like 2 valves, and the valves go back and forth. And then the other valve, it switches, and then water comes up. Water comes up back into the toilet. It fills the tank, which is usually in the back of the toilet, and then that tank gets filled up. And then the tank that's in there also has a separate water supply, which then fills up the lower part of the toilet, the part that you pee and poop in. And then all that water moving around between like the pipe back and forth, the toilet tank, and then the toilet bowl. And it takes 90 seconds for that whole process to actually complete. Which is actually a pretty long time, and considering how much water can move in that amount of time through the pipes anyways. A toilet's single use uses a lot of water. It's one of those things of like, we gotta just thank God for modern technology, because like, back in the ancient world before we had the system of like running water, the way that people had to go to the bathroom was really unsanitary. But it's one of those things that like, it's a weird like double-edged sword, because on the one hand, in the 21st century, we're just, especially if you live in like North America, you live in any developed country really, you're like, oh God, like thank God for like modern technology. Running water is one of the best technologies we have, and that we use all the freaking time. But of course, the problem with running water as a technology is that it uses a lot of water. It really does. And so, you hear all those like people talk about like, oh, we gotta reduce our water usage, whatever. It's like, it's not gonna happen as long as we keep using running water, because of how much it actually needs. And like per toilet flush, you use a lot of water. You probably use more water in toilet flushes than you drink in a week. Something like that. They tell you like a nutritionist might tell you that like you're supposed to drink like the equivalent of 8 cups of water a day. Although the people misinterpret that and they mean like you have to drink 8 cups of water separate from everything else, but that's actually not true. You usually get like 6 out of 8 of those cups of water in the food you eat. You usually get most of that already. Of course, if you want to, of course, there's like, you know, reasons to drink more water. Like if you have to, like if you work out, you obviously, what's that word? The scientific word of like using up more water. So you use up more water when you like work out. So you have to drink more than the minimum 8 cups. But if you, the minimum 8 cup thing, like that's not a lot of water, if you think about it. The minimum 8 cup thing, a single toilet flush, I think is like 20 cups. And that's a single toilet flush. If you go to the bathroom like 3 times a day, then that's pretty light. Let's say you go to the bathroom 5 times a day. That seems about normal. You go to the bathroom about 5 times a day. That's already 100 cups of water. You've used more water in 5 bathroom visits than water you almost drink in a whole week. More water than you drink in a week. After all, if you go with the minimum 8 cups of water a day, you're only going through 56 cups of water in a week. But you flush 5 times, and you've used 100 cups. You've already used almost twice as much than you would need to drink in a week on toilet flushes. It's really crazy to think about how much water we use for things like that. Laundry is probably like not that much. And you think about this too. So water, if you use your laundry machine, you probably use like roughly the same 20 cups of water. But you don't use the laundry 5 times a day. It'd be kind of weird if you even used it once a day. Like, I don't think, most people don't use the laundry every single day. At least for the same things. Because, like, for instance, in my house, like, the laundry machine's used every day, but that's because, like, you know, 5 people live here. So, if each person uses the laundry once a week, that's like 500 cups, but that's like between 5 people. Well, actually, no, sorry, I misdid that. So, laundry uses like 20 to 30 cups, depending how big your laundry machine is and how much you set the water to. Even within that whole week, you've probably used the toilet in a single day almost uses the same amount of water as your laundry does in a week. So that's how crazy, like, using like toilet water and how much water your toilet uses it's insane, because like one day of using the toilet is probably a little bit less than like 5 people using laundry in a week. It's definitely way more than how much water you drink in a week, which is just crazy to think about. And so that's the reason, well, I know I'm sidetracking here, but that's the reason why, like, every time the toilet goes off upstairs from where I am, because I'm in a basement, obviously, you can tell by the window that's up there. If you've ever watched some of my other streams and you notice there's that window above me, and then it looks like it's going like outside, but like you can tell that like it looks like it's low elevation because of how the light refracts. For you physics nerds out there. So basically there's a washroom above me, and every time that toilet goes off, it takes 90 seconds for all that water to cycle through. Because that's how much water is going through each time you use the toilet. It's actually pretty insane how much water your toilet uses. But anyway, that's a weird, crazy sidetrack I know I had to go off on. But back to the Canterbury Tales. And we're probably going to end it soon anyway, so it's kind of whatever. One of the things is also kind of funny that we notice, and then you'll kind of really, I'll kind of give us a small, kind of like a sneak peek of next week's reading stream. But, you know, the little theme you notice is that, like, it started from the knight telling this, like, idealized story about, like, love triangles and crap like that. But then, like, after the knight tells, like, a sincere, like, epic story, the storytelling activity just immediately devolves. It just goes like nosedive levels of devolving. And we just had like three like, well, we had two like body jokes, or BAWDY. That's your word for every Friday when you come to these reading streams. A body joke is just like just a Middle Ages way of saying like a dirty joke. And we went from the Knight's Tale to like two dirty jokes, or body jokes as they're called. And then we just get like a little commentary on body jokes. So it like immediate, the storytelling immediately devolved. And we're like only 4 stories in, 3 stories in, no 4 stories in. We're 4 stories in, and we've already devolved this much. It's like just one of those funny side things. Something I got into because I thought they were so funny was when they did like the AI generated voices, and you watch like the president's AI voice videos. So the whole joke with those, for those of you who don't know, and the meme's kind of dying already because you can only like the joke doesn't have enough substance to keep it going. But the joke is that like basically they have like an AI generated Donald Trump, a Joe Biden, and an Obama, and they'll play like they'll do something together. Usually the meme is like them playing a video game, or they'll make tier lists, like how a lot of gaming channels make tier lists. And the joke in those videos is how like the guys will start serious, and the presidents are being serious when they're playing games. But of course the whole joke, nothing like killing a joke by explaining it. But the idea is that like since these are like a bunch of old presidents that are out of touch with humanity, they themselves quickly like devolve from like the topic at hand to just shit talking each other. And being like total asshats, because you know that's the whole attitude toward like American presidents. So anyway, that's kind of the running theme in those videos, that like they'll start serious and then they'll quickly devolve into them just bickering at each other and talking shit about, you know, each other's weird characteristics. And that's kind of what happened in the Canterbury Tales here, where like the story, the activity that the innkeeper has all these travelers doing, it starts out super serious with the knight, but quickly went like devolving into just shouting body jokes. But when we get to the sergeant's tale next week, he kind of tries to shift the attitude back, because the sergeant goes like, "Yo guys, what the shit? Like this is supposed to be like a fun time for all of us to like not just turn it into a, you know, awkward, disturbing story time. Like, let's tell good stories." I thought the whole point of this was to win the game. And so, like, you know, you have people like the sergeant who takes the game seriously. And he'll kind of shift the attitude of the storytelling back. And then you get to some of the later stories and they become a lot more serious. But it's easy to, like, forget about how, like, if you were to read the Canterbury Tales for the first time, and for some of you this may be your very first experience with it, I still encourage you to actually read it yourself, even though I'm going to read the whole book for you. But I still prefer that you read it yourself and actually like nitpick the details yourself. But you'll kind of see that, like, I guess from like when Chaucer is reporting these stories, and what I guess like it works out for them is that like you kind of get these like shitty body joke stories out of the way early. There will be a couple more that come back. We do get some body jokes later, but to kind of like get those out of the way, but at the same time, from like a reading perspective, it can be like, I can see why like people go like reading is for nerds, is because like you read something like the Canterbury Tales and the first few stories is just like immediately devolved. And you have to overthink the story as to justify why like half the nonsense happens as it does. But I promise you, when we get to the sergeant's tale next week, the sergeant takes things a bit more seriously, and then he kind of shifts the mood of the storytelling into like, okay, let's be serious about this. Let's actually play the game properly. Because remember, they're betting like you're betting paying for someone else's feast. That's a pretty big stake. So if that much money is riding on the line, you better play the game properly. And so that's where the sergeant will kind of like shift gears in the story. But the first few stories, we just had like these funny ass stories about like old dudes getting cucked by young guys, and how much of a problem that is in our society. Just like it was back then, apparently. But hey, as much as things change, things also stay the same. And that's why, like, you know, I can read something like the Canterbury Tales, even though it's like almost 1,000 years old as a story. There's still a lot of things you can learn from it today. Anyway, I think that's it for reading today. I just wanted to go light today, because I didn't want to start the Sergeant's Tale yet. His story's almost enough to be a whole stream, honestly. So I kind of wanted to save it for later. But anyway, with that said, I'm just gonna do some housekeeping, and then we'll probably end the stream now. So next week we should have a pretty regular streaming schedule of Octopath Traveler on Monday and Wednesdays at 2 o'clock Pacific time. I may have to just like backtrack on that Ochette story and come back to it later. But I wonder if I get to keep the loot if I change stories, because I'm kind of like stuck in the game. I think I kind of tackled that Ochette chapter 3 too early. But save for that, we'll do Octopath Traveler on Monday and Wednesdays at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Don't forget to keep track with the Throwback Thursday videos that go up every Thursday, obviously. And we'll be back with reading more of the Canterbury Tales next Friday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Actually, no. I just totally forgot that next Friday is Good Friday. No, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway on Good Friday. Because why not, I guess. It's not like I'm doing much else. I mean, I could be doing stuff with family on Good Friday, but I think we'll still do the reading stream next Friday. I'll try it, but no promises. I want to do it because I already missed last week. So I don't want to miss like 2 weeks that close to each other. So I even though next Friday is Good Friday, I do want to keep reading the Canterbury Tales. But with that said, maybe we will go lighter and I'll only read the Sergeant's Tale next week, and I won't read who goes after him. I can't remember who goes after him. I think it's is it the yeoman who goes after? It's another it's probably the yeoman who goes after the sergeant. But we'll probably just read only the sergeants next Friday. So that's already a 2-hour stream, really. So I think that's kind of the plan for next week. If there are no questions, I think we're going to end the stream here. I hope you guys enjoyed the Canterbury Tales and 2 dirty jokes. 3 if you include the whole toilet talk. But with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading stream today. I'll be back on Monday with more Octopath Traveler 2. Until then, I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great Friday night. I'll see you guys Monday. God bless you.